Hello, historians. It's Miss Jones again. Today we are going to be looking at two chapters in particular, chapter 26 and 27. I'm going to get started right now. I'm going to try not to be repetitive with your reading and also with the addition of the study material that I have given you. I have uploaded chapter 26 and 27 from a gentleman who talks like this, like his nose is clogged up, but he's really laying out some great information and going bit by bit from the book. So it's a great refresher for you. What I plan to do is just kind of hit some key takeaway points of the two chapters, and I'm going to be extremely brief. So here we go. All right, these two chapters examine features of Afro-Eurasian empires that were land-based, thus the title Land-Based Empires, from 1450 to 1750. That is, they expanded across vast areas of forests, deserts, and grasslands. So in East Asia, the Ming Dynasty in China was replaced by outsiders known as the Manchu, who expanded their borders. And then the Ottoman Empire had been expanding since the 13th century and continued to do so in this particular era. The Mughals spread into South and Central Asia. Russia, which we talked about last week, which was centered in Eastern Europe, added thousands of miles of land in Asia to its particular empire. And then the Persian Safavid Empire clashed with the Ottomans and the Mughals as they tried to stretch out their borders. All right, here we go. Empires expanding. So these land-based empires used the Chinese innovation of gunpowder with military forces to expand. So that is why historians label them as the gunpowder empires. In China, the once powerful Ming Dynasty had weakened and was replaced by the Manchu Qing Dynasty from 1644 to 1912. The Manchus came from north of China, namely Manchuria, and they remained a minority ethnic group in the land in which they ruled. So really and truly, the Ming Dynasty was the last official Chinese dynasty under the leadership of Hongwu. Before the Turkish migrant groups started coming in, and also when outsiders started coming in, and these mainly from Manchuria. I didn't mean to say Turkish groups. The Turkish groups are going to find themselves relevant when we talk about the latter three, the Ottoman, Mughal, and the Safavid. Anyway, so these were these ethnic groups. They ruled in the land. They had adopted this Chinese language. They had adopted the Confucian philosophy. And they did a bit of a spin on it with the Neo-Confucianism as well. They also maintained the Chinese bureaucracy, and they continued the ancient concept of the mandate of heaven, which justified that the rule of an emperor, as long as he led the people correctly, that he was commissioned by God, and as long as famines and wars didn't break out, the ruler was there to stay. Because they were a minority in China and outsiders, the Qing rewarded ethnic Chinese soldiers and generals who supported their rule. They also allowed local Chinese rulers to keep their status as long as they had obeyed the Qing policies. And the Qing also were very tolerant of local faiths and customs, which kind of leads me into that of the role of the Jesuits, that of the Christian Jesuits, to be exact. So the chapter 26 opens up with Matteo Ricci. He has come into China. He is trying to influence the Chinese to kind of convert to Christianity. And let me read a small portion out of a book that I have. And the Jesuits are going to play a huge role. Remember, they are the rulers of God. They walk the area. They're known for their missionary work. So the European Christians had encountered that of the Chinese between that of the 16th and 18th centuries, with the Ming dynasty in 1368 to 1644, and then the Qin from 1644 to 1912. Um, at no point was China's political independence or their cultural integrity threatened by the handful of European missionaries and traders working in the particular area. The Europeans needed permission of the Chinese authorities to actually operate in the country because the Qing dynasty had kind of enclosed themselves, especially after Zheng He and his voyages, but they kind of enclosed themselves because they did not want the influence of the Europeans to invade their bureaucracy, to invade their dynasty, and to take over, basically. Um, The leading missionary order in China, the Jesuits, took deliberate aim at the official Chinese elite. Matteo Ricci, like I mentioned before, came into China about 1582, and he stayed until about 1610. And many of the Jesuits in that particular time period had learned Chinese. They had become thoroughly acquainted with the classical Confucian texts. They had dressed like the Chinese scholars. But they had downplayed their mission to kind of convert, and instead of trying to convert them, just kind of basically emphasize that their interest in exchanging ideas and learning from the Chinese ancient culture. So basically, what they would do, the Europeans would share their viewpoints of science and technology and geography and map making to this curious audience of these Chinese scholars. And they were fascinated by the scholarly works of these Jesuits and the knowledge that they maintained. So in presenting those particular things, Christian teachings came about. The Jesuits were at pains to be very respectful of the Chinese culture. They pointed out parallels between Confucianism and Christianity rather than basically portraying it as something new and foreign to them. They chose to define Chinese rituals honoring the emperor. Also, which is big for Chinese custom, is venerating ancestors as secular or civil observances rather than a religious practice. All right. So nothing approaching mass conversion to Christianity took place in China, even with the works of the science and the mathematics and the technology. Nobody converted. Well, a handful did, but they really did not convert. A modest number of Chinese scholars and officials did become Christians. They were attracted by the personal lives of the missionaries, by their interest in Western science, and by the moral certainty that Christianity offered. Jesuit missionaries found favor for a time at the Chinese imperial court. Mathematics, astronomical, technological, map-making skills rendered themselves kind of actually useful. Like I had mentioned before, they were fascinated by it. Now they became useful. But fundamentally, towards the end, the missionaries offered little that the Chinese really officially needed. Furthermore, it became increasingly clear that Christianity was an all or nothing faith that required converts to abandon much of their traditional Chinese culture. Basically, what had happened was during this particular time, the Chinese realized that the further into the Christian teachings that they had gotten, that these Chinese gentlemen were going to have to put away their concubines, which was a huge no to them. And also during the early 18th century, the papacy or the Pope said, hey, how dare y'all accommodate for the Chinese? You need to stop because, when we look at Christianity, it is an all or nothing religion. So of course, that didn't work in the Chinese favor. The Jesuits eventually were ran out of China. Some of the Chinese looked at the Christian rituals of Holy Communion as a kind of cannibalism act. Missionaries that had great interest in maps. The Chinese believed that they were like spies to aggressive foreigners. And so, believe it or not, all of these shortcomings of Christianity prompted the Christians to have to leave that of China. Whew! All right. So with that being said, the section you did not have to read, but I kind of just want to briefly highlight over was the Tokugawa shogunate, that of Japan. It was known as a military governor during this time. They ruled Japan through retainers who had received political rights and large estates in exchange for military service. So it was looked upon as a feudal system. All right. The shogun, which was actually a stand-in for the emperor. He was the source of political authority. He basically monopolized power. The emperor, on the other hand, was just a figurehead. He sat beautifully clothed in his Japanese attire, and he was just the central figurehead for Japan. The Sengoku was the country at war. So during this particular time, many of the shoguns were at war with each other. During the Tokugawa Ieyasu, who reigned from 1600 to 1616, he was the chieftain who established this military form of government. And it was known as the Bakufu because it was supposed to be a temporary replacement for the emperor during this particular time, but it lasted longer than a temporary time. And basically, to kind of stabilize power and control, there were some portions of land called the daimyo, which were 260 sections of land. And in these daimyos were political head figures, great names as they call them. They were powerful territorial lords. They had ruled most of Japan from their vast hereditary land holdings. And so these daimyos had strict restrictions placed on them. Some of the daimyos functioned as absolute rulers in their domains. And so because of that, there was constant conflict. They had military subordinates in these daimyos, They had a judiciary system. They had schools. They had paper money. They interacted with European mariners. And so with that, the shoguns had to do something about the power in which the daimyos held. So basically, they had the daimyo families reside in Edo, which is the capital city during this time. And every other year, they had to live in the Tokugawa court so they could be controlled and watched. Like the gentleman mentioned in chapter 26, they had to have permission to engage in one another. They had to have permission to marry outside of the daimyo, which they highly discouraged. They even had to have permits for the construction. And also they had to have permission just to visit. So that was the way in which they tried to hold control under this Tokugawa system of rule. I'm going to stop right there with that because those are the most important pieces. Let me get to the Ottoman Empire. And right there, I am going to actually stop this video and create another one because I'm already 13 minutes in. And oh, heavens, it's going to take me longer than 2 minutes to discuss the Ottomans, Mughals, and the Safavid. I'll be right back.